Homeowners in mortgage arrears. We'll find out in a few minutes.
Welcome back. Figures released by the Central Bank of Ireland last week revealed that the number of households in mortgage arrears by at least 90 days has now risen to over 12%.
But what exactly is going on behind these figures, and is there any hope for homeowners? Well, joining us are Angela Keegan of myhome.ie and personal finance expert Karl Deeter from advisors.ie. Nice to see you again. Angela, are you surprised that the figure has gone up by 3,000?
I'm surprised at the rate of acceleration. I think if you look back to September 2009, there were 3.3% of mortgages in arrears at a value of about 480 million. So in 42 months, that's jumped to a value of 1.8 billion and 12.3 of all mortgages. So whatever we're doing, it's clear it's not working.
No.
Because the problem is absolutely accelerating at a rate of knots.
Karl, the split mortgages, it seems to have been ineffective.
Yeah, there's a lot of ideas out there for people who have problems, and some of them are really appealing when you hear like, oh yeah, split the mortgage in two. But some of the problems, for instance, with split mortgages are that when you get one, it has to be on a repayment basis. Now, because half of all mortgages are tracker mortgages and their rate is already so low, to get it that the repayment would be less than interest only, because that's really the other choice that banks seem to be willing to use the most, is just long-term interest only. You'd have to actually split down about 50% of it into the warehouse. And there doesn't seem to be a willingness to do that. And it's important to remember that when we talk about all of these great ideas and long-term solutions, that really long-term interest only, while rates are low, is probably going to be what banks will push for, and in some cases to capitalise the arrears, because then that makes the loan look like it's back healthy again, when in fact really all you're doing is giving it that appearance. Underneath, the borrower might not have the ability to repay that loan still, and they'll go back into arrears. At least half of all the restructures don't actually work out. And so getting something that actually works over the long term is the trick, and we don't seem to have done that so far.
Yeah. Do you think this figure of over 12% from the central bank is accurate? Because a lot of people out there will do everything they can to pay their mortgage. Like, it'll be the first thing they pay. They'll even not put food on the table just so they'll pay their mortgage, and they mightn't have any money at the end of the month for anything else. So do you think this figure actually could be much higher when it comes to lack of disposable income? And
I think we have to take the figure that we get from the central bank as a true figure of what's happening in the mortgage arena. But I think we look at what the central bank have released, and a lot of people look upon it as, you know, a debt problem. But to your point, I think it's a much bigger problem than that, because yes, there's 12.3% or 95,000 mortgages are in arrears of 90 days or more. There's a lot of mortgages who are in arrears, haven't hit the 90-day mark, and exactly, there's a lot of households who are under severe financial pressure, but they're managing to meet the mortgage repayment every month because the fear of God is in them that potentially they would lose their house if they didn't.
Okay. And Karl, you actually said it's a bit like cancer, that it's, you know, going to happen.
Yeah, I describe mortgage arrears as being similar to cancer, because it takes a while to express itself, and by the time you realise it's happening, quite often it can almost be too late. And that's obviously with all empathy in the world to people who've experienced cancer in their lives, but I'm just saying that financially it works almost the same way. And now it's reached such a critical point that I don't know that you can necessarily just turn it around easily. And that means that it's going to be something that goes on for a very long time. We've also had, for instance, the central bank step in the way of letting that process occur by halting repossessions, which can seem, again, at first pass, wow, that's a really good idea. But in the year that that repossession doesn't take place, it doesn't mean the person isn't still going to lose their home, but they go deeper into debt. They might not have alternative housing solutions at the end of it. The whole idea of mortgage to rent isn't happening. So what it can do is effectively drag out something for much longer, when in fact, if they were just to get over it, you know, get the hard part done, they could move on with their lives. Even the legislation around insolvency, which was meant to be, you know, functional many months ago at this stage, still isn't there. So when it comes to dealing with problems like this, we just have a uniquely Irish way of not doing the right things. And unfortunately, this nation is turning into a template for making bad decisions when it comes to banking and finance crisis, and then dealing with the fallout from it.
So how not to deal with it?
Precisely. As a matter of fact, our central bank governor wrote a paper in 2000 called Controlling the Fiscal Cost of Banking Crises. And if you read that paper and look through all the things that you shouldn't do, and then look at what we've actually done, you're reading the same thing.
Well, we wanted to know what your reaction was to the worrying increase in mortgage arrears, so I went out and about to find out.
The banks were very negligent in letting people borrow way more than they could afford. Certainly when we got our mortgage, we had a very new baby. We didn't realise how expensive it was going to be to bring up 2 children. I've since been made redundant. I've no job at the moment, and my husband is definitely working longer hours and everything. So I think while people borrowed way more than they could, and the responsibility is on the bank to help out people, I do know that our bank is AIB, and they have kind of written to us saying, if you have difficulties, we can help you, and they do seem to be reaching out. But at the same time, they've put up the mortgage interest.
As far as I'm concerned, you're probably almost better going bankrupt and just saying, to hell with it, I'll start over again, sort of thing. But
even though bankruptcy takes years in this country.
I know, but I mean, sure, what else could you do? Have that hanging around your neck for the rest of your life? Literally, it will be for the rest of your life, because how long are you going to be paying off a mortgage, you know? So I'm just going to rent forever now. I'm not ever going to get a mortgage ever.
We all have to take pain, and we are all taking pain. But I think that the government is doing a good job. They're doing a good job with the economy. It's very, very difficult. Very unpopular decisions have to be made, and they are making the hard decisions.
I don't have a mortgage. I'm one of the lucky ones, but I do feel sorry for the young people trying to cope with the situation the country is in, and hopefully things will improve in the next 5 years.
Younger people who are earning and they can't get mortgages because of people who are in arrears, and they can't pay, so they
So you're not getting a mortgage now because of what happened with...
Yeah, pretty much. It's harder for us, applying, banks aren't lending because people aren't paying back, so it's harder for younger people trying to start off.
In the 80s, we had it very hard in the 80s, with the way things were when we were rearing our kids. So I think now that the young crowd, I feel terribly, terribly sorry for them, because both have to go out to work. At my stage, even though it was hard going, we didn't have to go out to work. But I feel the government should be really helping them.
A whole variety of comment. Angela, though, there have been some new mortgages.
Yes.
Has there been an increase?
There, year on year, I think Q1 year on year, the number of new mortgages is actually down, but the number of transactions, in other words, the number of houses selling, are actually up.
Okay.
And that's accounted for in the main by about 40% of properties that are changing hands now are what would be known as cash transactions, in that if any finance is needed, it's not at a mortgage level. So while we're seeing the market is improving, in an improvement, what I mean by that is we're seeing more transactions. In fact, 2012 there was about 26,000 properties sold in the country. That was up from just over 18,000 in 2011, and the trend for 2013 is also positive over 2012.
And what about house prices?
House prices, I suppose, what I would be saying is it's almost a story of two halves. Dublin, most certainly, we've seen prices bottom out. We are beginning to see prices go up. Don't want to exaggerate it, go up gradually. Dublin South, Dublin North. Cork, we're seeing prices stabilise. We're beginning to see prices edge northwards. The rest of the country, albeit prices are still declining, the rate of decline has most definitely eased over what it was.
So, Karl, we're at the bottom now then?
Potentially. You can never know for sure. There's never an example where you still can't lose more of your money. But I would say, from having studied property cycles, that we've got the hallmarks of being somewhere around the bottom. I think really the missing ingredient now is credit. Yes. I think if credit starts to get loosened up a bit, which the banks said they were going to do, but which the figures so far show that they're not doing, then it could actually help the market. And it's important to remember that rising property prices zooming up is a bad thing, but actually rising with inflation so that there's people there willing to supply it, willing to work in that industry. These are all important things, and as much as we hate it, we still need construction and property as part of a healthy economy so that we can house people. There's still 200 families being formed every week in Dublin alone. They've got to live somewhere. So it's actually the fall off in activity during a bust is what creates the next boom, because it creates scarcity, which then needs a ramp up of supply, and that creates the mania. It's almost like this perpetual loop that we're going through. So it'd be nice if we could avoid doing that again.
Well, Willie O'D has made a comment that he thinks it's ironic that these new figures are released at the same time that a new code of conduct is being spoken about. And there's worry then that, as the people of Flack have said, that there will be more repossessions because people just won't be able to deal with
I think
their debt.
we have to take it in context. As I say, the figures tell us that there's 95,000 mortgages in arrears, and yet in Q1 of this year, 266 applications went in front of the court, of which just over 50%, I think it was 150 something, were granted, and then it was 166 166 properties were actually repossessed by the bank. But what's interesting is 2/3 of those properties were willingly handed back or abandoned by the owner. So if you think there's 95,000 mortgages in arrears of 90 days or more, and yet there is 151, if I have the number correct, of mortgages actually handed back to the banks. It's very, very low in the first quarter of this year.
Yeah, what happened is there was 166 properties taken back into possession, but most of them were actually all done voluntarily, or the properties were abandoned. But that code of conduct on mortgage arrears that you mentioned, that's going to be released in 2 days' time, so this Thursday, and it's very worrying what's happening. Banks may be able to take back trackers if it's in the interest of the borrower. Now, I always thought that was from a financial interest, but apparently that might not be the case. It might be that if part of the negotiation to keep them on interest only is in their interest, and therefore you get taken off it, the amount of contact that the bank can have with the borrower is going to be ramped up. So there's a lot of things about this where I think it's, in some respects, a win for the bank lobby. And a win for the bank lobby is a loss for the consumer lobby. And that's why I think you're seeing so much rage about it. So, when mixed with the absence of personal insolvency, when mixed with these increasing numbers in arrears, it really does make somewhat of a terrifying vista for the future. And I think you saw that in the people speaking to Sybil, where she said, our generation is basically being punished for what other people have done. And I think that view will actually start to grow, is that we'll all kind of set off against each other, pointing the finger, but that doesn't actually fix anything.
Okay, well, on that very cheery note, thank you for coming in to talk to us, and I look forward to seeing you again soon, Angela.
Thank you.
Karl, thank you. Thank you. And after the break, something anyone in mortgage arrears would dearly love. We meet the charity employees from Cork who didn't realise they'd won the lottery for over 2 whole weeks.